What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Axioms on Trial. If you don't remember, I am J Mike. You might have forgotten because I haven't been on in a while. And I wanted to kind of address that first. I guess I would just start with an apology for anybody that's an invested viewer in the show and enjoys what we do and has any specific expectations. I don't know why I should be like a exalted expectation, but I do apologize to anybody if I have let them down by not being on the shows. I don't really have an excuse. I've been very lazy and complacent. I finished up school. I thought that was it, but then school ended. So by the way, I graduated, so yay. But I thought that after that, it was like, oh, clearly it'll be easier. But it just turns out that I'm really lazy and complacent, and it's not like of a lack of passion. This is like something that's been consistent with me in a lot of different realms, so I have to kind of kick myself in the ass, whether it's music or other things. So I just wanted to at least give the most honest apology I could without trying to just give excuses for the reasons, or for my absence, rather. So hopefully that puts a patch over everything. If you are interested in seeing me or Cease beyond just YouTube, you can go on TikTok and check out Cease to Know's channel or mine at it's like underscore J Mike or 2 underscores J Mike for my backup. And we get on lives together there as well. We're going to try to stream those here. We've talked about it. We did it one time. If you enjoyed that stream, just let us know in the comments. We'll make that a consistent thing. But I did want to make sure that everything is at least addressed, and I didn't want to just start the show without kind of mentioning the absence. But hopefully that kind of takes care of that thing. But Cease, how about you? Why don't you pull me out of this?
I was just gonna say about the TikTok. I'm currently suspended on both my accounts, so I have I think 2 or 3 days left to be able to go live on my main account, and then like a week before I can go live on my other one. I have a third account that I don't have enough followers to go live with. It's just I have a strong love and hate relationship with TikTok. I think in some ways it's a really great app to be able to have good conversations. On the other, it's like you get suspended for no reason. It's just really enraging. Just the way the algorithm works is just messed up. So, but yeah, outside of that, today we have a guest on to talk about Christianity, and we're going to compare worldviews and see where that takes us. So
yeah, we'll go ahead and get the guest in, which I'm not even going to look at the chat. I did. Adam, I was right. In my mind, I was right, but I couldn't commit to it. I put it in the private chat. I was like, I'm not going to forget. I told Adam I'm horrible with names, and I forgot immediately. But I do remember now. It's going to be a point to remember. If you notice an audio change, I just realized that I had the wrong mic, so this should sound a lot better. We're going to go ahead and bring Adam in. Adam, what do you want to say about yourself? Like, did you have anything interesting? Are you an interesting person? Are you just boring as shit? Like, what's your thing, man?
I mean, first, thank you for bringing me on the channel. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys. As far as whether I'm boring or not, I mean, I'm a father of 3. So my life isn't boring. I'm constantly busy. I have a newborn boy, and then a 2-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl. So definitely never a moment to spare. So I'm happy I was able to carve this out with you guys. But really just I am a Christian. I was born and raised in the church. As in my teenage years, I got skeptical. Typical adolescence, learning more about the world, and it's like, hey, why can't you answer my questions to some of my, people in church, so on and so forth. And so I stepped away from the faith for a little bit, and then I ended up coming back as I learned about the evidential aspect of Christianity and theism, rather than just, hey, this is what you were raised in, this is true type thing. So that's kind of what got me to where I am today. My brother and I started this. We actually started back in 2017 doing like more of the scientific apologetics, more so than the philosophical. And then, or 2016. And then I don't want to get too political, but the 2016 election happened, and I was already kind of political beforehand, and I just got really political, and so that became more of my focus. And then
Okay.
I got tired of politics. Politicians, they're irritating. They no matter what side, you're gonna have some frustration, and they'll tell you one thing and do another. So I came back to more of the not only Christianity, but just trying to defend Christianity from an intellectual standpoint, not a blind I was born into this faith standpoint type thing. So that's in a nutshell how I got to where I am today.
I'm very curious to hear about your evidence because that's I've been doing this for about 15 years, like studying
Sure.
religion, studying ideology, and I'm yet to find anything that to me has been remotely convincing. And I'm open to it. It's not that I'm closed off to it. It's just
True.
every time I've heard someone say I have evidence, it's never flashed out to me to actually be evidence for whatever reason. So maybe you have something that I haven't heard before, and I'm open to hearing it. But out of curiosity, what side of the political spectrum do you fall under?
Now I'm just an independent man. I don't like to hook to a party because they both. I typically would consider myself more of a conservative, so
Mhm.
more so than a liberal. But there are things within the conservative party that I don't like that I like about the liberal party. And ultimately, I don't really like to go with any of the parties because at the end of the day, they're only they go where the money goes. They don't really necessarily stick to their worldview or to their party. They go to whoever's paying them. So
Sure.
to me, it's not about a matter of who you're with. It's a matter of principle. Um, who's going to tell me the truth, right? Like from a financial standpoint, I work in the finance industry. I'm very much keen and aware of where my taxes go, and I'd like to know why they do what. And I try to, vote for who's going to, at the local level more so than the higher level,
Mhm.
who's going to force me to pay taxes for what. Like, for example, my wife and we're going to homeschool our children more than likely or send them to private school. To me, it's a very important issue. I should be able to get some of those taxes back from the local perspective to go towards our schooling, especially if it's our funds that pay for school. You're forcing me to pay for everybody else's school when that's not where I'm going to be sending my kids to public school. So to me, it's just one of the many issues that reign within our political spectrum.
Sure. Mike, do you know who Brendan is?
No,
That's my
but they're
brother.
welcome to. It's who?
That's my brother.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't know who it is, but they're welcome to email the show, or I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't mind having two people on if it's your brother and you know them and he wants to come on. He's prepared.
Yeah, he co-hosts the show with me. I didn't know you, Mike, were going to be on. I thought it was just going to be C. So I didn't want to have like a
Sure, and I have no problem just being in the background if it's more comfortable having a one-on-one. I mean, presumably there's
doesn't matter to
objections
me.
that I don't want to bite my tongue on, but if you do want your brother on and he can come on while we discuss, I don't have an issue with that. I don't know if Cease would.
Yeah. Is he asking? Is that what he said in the comments?
I just saw bring Brendan on. I don't have any opposition. I typically don't like random people just coming on. Like it's not like a show to interrupt and come on, but if it's something you already like do stuff with them and it's them, then I don't have any issue with that. But I want to prevent it so I can vet them because people can just come up and like share their screen with like porn on it and then get our account screwed up, which has happened to people that I know. So I want to make sure that things like that don't happen, but I don't think that would happen in your case, obviously. But if they want to come up, just let us know. We can give you a StreamYard link, and that's fine.
Okay, he's gonna run home, so I guess if you can send it to, I'll send it to him once he gets
just
home.
send him the link in your URL. I will say that I will probably end the live for myself around 8-ish, 8:15. But so if we, depending on what time we can get in here, that's probably going to be crucial. But if we want to go ahead and start, I mean, where do you want to go with it, and then I'll just kind of chime.
Yeah, I want to know what this evidence is, and what has convinced you that Christianity is true, and then we can go through every point. Yeah.
Sure. Let me just send this link to. But to start with, the first apologist or whatever you want to call them that I really took notice to several years ago was Frank Turek. Um, whether you love him or hate him, I've seen him live. He's actually a really good presenter. And so he was one of the first people I ever saw that was going to like secular colleges and doing presentations. And so he has like the standard 3 original arguments. And this is before I got into like William Lane Craig or Josh Rasmussen or any of the philosophers, Ed Feser.
I was gonna ask you if you knew like Rasmussen or something, because if it stopped at Turek, I was gonna be like,
when you said Turek, Mike and I just looked at each other.
Well, I mean, love him or hate him, he has a very good approach to somebody who's new into that aspect and to like an introduction into going farther. You may disagree with him, but as somebody who who found his discussions at least interesting, that was an introduction for me, and so that's how I got into more. And then I remember like the another person that I got into that was very interesting was Paul Copan. I think a book, I don't know if you guys have read his book, Is God a Moral Monster? He's a professor of philosophy, I think down at the University of Miami, some Florida university. That's like his thing. He's semi Old Testament scholar and does like the moral aspect. But that's Frank Turek has your cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and then the moral argument. It's like his staples. Not that he can't do other arguments, that's just what he does.
Sure. Would you agree with like the moral argument? Like presumably it's like, I don't have to think off the top of my head, but it's like if moral facts exist, then God exists, and moral facts exist, therefore God exists, or something like that. Or
yeah, if moral absolutes exist, then God exists. Moral absolutes, or if objective moral values and duties exist, then God exists. It's been premised to objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. I think,
or is it the opposite? Is it if God exists, then objective morals and duties exist, God exists, therefore, or which one is it?
No,
I always kind of okay. I was like, I always want to flip it, so I just want to make sure.
Well, it's just stating that if they do exist, then God is real. Then premise 2, they do exist, therefore God is real.
Yeah. So, do you agree with that? Because like I would have objections immediately to the entailment that objective morality, therefore God. I don't see.
I do agree with it. I do find it one of the most difficult to defend, though.
I see.
I would not.
Well, maybe if you want to defend something different, because like my objection there is just going to be there's no entailment from objective morality to theism. That there's no logical inference from objective morality to theism.
Do you think
because you could be a moral naturalist? What we're talking about with it is stance independent facts, and so I'd actually argue that in most cases for theism, it's not going to be a stance independent moral fact. It's going to be a stance dependent moral fact. So it's not actually going to be objective. It's going to actually just be stance dependent and subjective. But
to God,
there's because I mean it's just going to be dependent on like the nature or desires of God. If it comes down to commands, I mean, then an evil God could command what's good, or some God with some other set of properties could determine what's good. And that's just seemingly going to be like arbitrary from the notion that I'm coming from. And so that's one issue. But the main issue is there's no entailment from objective morality. If objective morality exists, to me, it's like saying if I farted, then it smelled. No, because sometimes I can fart and it just doesn't smell. Right? It just I don't get the entailment.
Mike and I actually are kind of see morality differently from our perspective. I am a moral naturalist. So Mike, right now you're still an anti-realist, right?
Huh?
You're an anti-realist.
Yeah. I would be like an error theorist.
Right. So I, on the other hand, I think. Do you know what phenomenology is?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I've heard the term.
Yeah. So it's basically just the idea that we can talk about subjective experience in objective terms. It's the idea that even subjective experience has a nature to it with some shared universals. So like we can say that, if you look at a glass on a table and I look at a glass on a table, we're both different people having two subjective experiences. But because there's a shared nature to consciousness, we can actually communicate about what that experience is like and recognize that actually we're having basically the same experience it's not like exactly the same because we're two different people, but it's the same enough that we can understand each other. That there's still a foundation there where it's not going to be completely relative from person to person. And so when we talk about morality, from my perspective, we're really talking about harm reduction. And so words like good and bad are referring
Well,
to.
that right there, that would be where I would have to jump in and say that's kind of a presupposition because you're assuming that's good.
No, so that's exactly where I disagree, even with the uh, anti-realists, is that I don't think I'm actually presupposing it. I think I'm observing the fact that we inherently value certain experiences over others, and then we use language to categorize those experiences. So it's not that I'm assuming that certain experiences are better, it's that I'm having the experience, the self-evident experience, that certain things are
Mhm.
better, and then using my language to categorize those differences. Language is secondary and experience is primary. So I don't think at all it's a presupposition. I think it's an
So what? But
observation.
so why would you say that harm reduction is good, objectively speaking?
By virtue of what it is like to experience harm. So that when we say that harm is bad, that is the descriptor that we use to talk about the type of experience that we want to move away from. And I'm not talking about all suffering. Like there's obviously certain suffering that, like for example, if I want to gain better shape, I have to work out, right? Like there's
Mhm.
some. I don't mean that kind of suffering. I mean there are certain kinds of psychological sufferings that, by virtue of what we are as conscious creatures, we inherently move away from. Like you're not going to find somebody to
So,
value
but when you say,
having PTSD, for example. Like it's
well,
just
yeah,
not.
but when you say you inherently know that, how do you know that?
What do you mean? How do I know that?
Like you
I
just say, I inherently know. It's not really. It's
Oh
like a
no.
brute fact, is what you're
Oh,
saying.
I'm not saying that we inherently know like even most uh, answers to most moral questions. What I'm saying is that what is inherent is a recognition that certain experiences are preferable to others. So it's within the experience. So think about it this way: like it's not a presupposition for me to put my hand on a hot stove and say that hurts. I don't want to do that. It just I recognize that I don't want to do that through the experience, and then I use my language to call that bad. Is what I'm saying. I'm not claiming that we have inherently know necessarily how we should behave in every moral conundrum. Like that's especially when the situations become more complex. It actually becomes much more difficult to recognize what will lead us to well-being as opposed to suffering. It's possible to value the wrong thing just by virtue of not having all the information. Do you get
But
what I'm
that,
saying?
I get what you're saying, but you keep saying like well-being, and like you're assuming that these things are good. But what's the objective grounding for why well-being or
The,
harm reduction is good?
the phenomenology itself, I don't think I'm assuming it. I think I'm observing it. I don't think I need a justification outside of what the experience itself entails. Like I'm not going into it assuming that a certain experience is just going to be better. I'm having the experience that it is better.
I
And
think Adam, his claim is that it's incorrigible or something like that. It's true in virtue of like being believed. Like there's not it's going to be an incorrigible relationship in the same way that like existing, right? Like you couldn't write some argument against like your existence or something because it's going to be an incorrigible like part of your nature. Would that be fair? I do want to say that I don't know if we should get into the meta ethics thing because
sure, maybe we can, because I do want to hear your other evidence as well. But
yeah, well, because if he said that the moral thing isn't as well with him, I'm okay with the meta ethics thing, but I just wanted to make sure that maybe we get to like
the other
the
pieces.
general,
Yeah,
the
and we can
general
always
views.
circle back. We can always circle
The
back.
main reason I
Well,
wanted to just challenge, and I want to give you the last word, Adam, on this, or anything that you want to challenge with. The main thing I wanted to point out was, at least from the view, is that someone like Cease is a moral realist. There's moral naturalism. I don't agree with those positions, but I don't see it privileged to theism. That just sounds like some like, I don't know. It seems like hubris on the level of the theist to just claim that it has to be grounded in a mind, because it just begs the question against stance independent moral facts that are grounded without intentional states, right? It's just going to beg the question against any other realist that doesn't accept that view. And so I just don't find it interesting.
you don't. When you say you don't find it interesting, like you don't want to discuss it, or you just
I
don't.
don't find it interesting to beg the
Okay.
question against the moral naturalist who doesn't have to invoke intentional, some like intentional state that prompts the like moral law, right? They're not going to accept that view. They're just going to go, that's ridiculous, right? And so to me, it seems very clear that the literature in metaethics doesn't depend on whether or not there's a moral lawgiver, right? That's actually just something like most people in metaethics are just going to just dispute, say it's confused. And I think for good reason, because the whole domain between that is stance independent moral facts and stance dependent moral facts. And the moral realist or the moral naturalist like Cease can just say there's a stance dependent fact about phenomenal states of agents. And that's what actually just grounds something being right or wrong.
Yeah, which doesn't require some external justification beyond what is within the experience itself, that it is self-contained. That we use words like good and bad to describe those differences, which is what I think we do with language in general anyway.
So
yeah.
how would you
go ahead,
compare, like, if somebody has a different opinion than you, how do you square that away without having a transcendent object to look towards to be the judge or to be the deciding factor?
Because it's not dependent on opinion, it's dependent on the nature of mind. The
Exactly.
same way that if somebody...
Whose mind?
Consciousness as a whole, as a phenomena.
Yeah, he's not saying it's dependent on attitudes, opinions of agents. He's saying it's like there's a fact about gradients in phenomenal experience, and that gradients, there's an objective good, right? Yeah. There's peaks and valleys in between that, but there's going to be something that's bad, right? Objectively bad phenomenal states that we ought to move away from, and phenomenal states that we.
So I'll give an example that can answer your question better. The same way that if somebody says that they happen to believe that they can eat McDonald's every single day and be physically healthy, like they just happen to believe that, that's actually going to lead, like that's not going to be the case. There's going to be facts,
you're going to say it stance independently wrong, right?
Yeah, there's going to be facts about their physical health. When I think about morality, I'm talking about a certain type of psychological health that is not going to be arbitrary to the opinions of an individual. They're going to be facts about how our consciousness operates, that is not going to be about what they happen to believe privately, but it's going to be things we can observe about the actual nature of experience, which is beyond our just mere opinion or stances.
So how do we, this is what I don't get. When we're looking at the Nazis, for example, right? And if I'm sure you've seen the Nuremberg trials, or at least heard of, that was the argument that the Nazi lawyers used, was that we did what our people, our government told us to do.
Sure.
And what, the argument of the Allies was, no, there is a moral law that we follow. What you guys did was objectively wrong.
Yeah, it's very easy. We would just say the Nazis caused harm. Even if they didn't think they were, they objectively caused harm. What do we mean by harm? Here are the examples of what harm we mean by harm. Suffering, imposition of will onto other people, the killing of other people. These are all actions that lead to harm. In the same way that the person who might want to call themselves healthy but drink poison all day is not going to actually be correct about using the term health to describe themselves. The Nazi is going to be wrong about claiming that what they did was good. It's just going to be a matter of it's like this, to me, again, because I'm not basing it on opinion, what the Nazis believe they did is completely irrelevant to me, any more than if somebody says, I believe the earth is flat, is not a problem for physics.
Yeah, essentially you would say, Cease, that's going to fail in respect to like what actually would be the stance independent facts or the phenomenal states that.
Yeah, like the phenomenology is independent of the opinion of any one individual.
And I'm not trying to be biased, but this is why, like, I don't agree with Cease, and I know this is going to mean like nothing to you, Adam. We have 4 or 5 videos of us just disagreeing on this, so I have backup proof, and we talk about this all the time. We never agree on this. I'm coming more to understanding his view, but that to me is more coherent of what I would consider moral realism than like it's derived from the nature of some being, right? And that whatever the commands the being has or whatever its nature happens to be determines that truth. And there's partially a criticism that I would have on Cease's view is that whatever nature we have determines good. I might have criticisms about that. It just seems that, in my opinion, all we're boiling these things down to is desires of some agent. And that's like not what, right? It's going to be independent like a shoe. is stance independent, right? It doesn't depend on my stances or anybody's stances. It just depends on the fact of whether it exists. But
Adam, let me
I do want to see if we can move to some scientific
I want to say
evidence
one
on
last
either
thing.
one of the sides. I don't care,
Yeah.
naturalism or theism,
Okay.
but
I do
want to see if we can, because I want to make sure we get to the theism, atheism type of discussion.
Adam, I'm just going to say one last thing. The same way that you view it being dependent on the nature of God, I view it as dependent on nature. The same way that you are concerned about well-being in heaven with God as opposed to suffering for eternity in hell, I also care about well-being and suffering. I just don't think that I need to make the assumption of God to exist for those experiences to have an objective nature. And we can always, I would love to have you back, and we can get into the more arguments.
If we could put a tab and have, because we need at least a whole hour minimum to go over the moral argument. I think that's probably that one takes one, if not the longest, the second longest, outside of the logical argument.
Yeah.
So
get into the science part, I guess.
We'll put a tab there for that, I guess. So when you and I originally met, Cease, on TikTok, we were debating the Kalam, or at least I was debating, and I'm not the reason I didn't mind having the two of you. I'm used to debating like 5-6 people at once on TikTok. You guys,
it happens. No, it happens. Like we understand that because we get on TikTok too. So yeah,
and they'll just bombard me and whatnot. So the Kalam had come up, and then you and I had some discussions on the Kalam. I find that to be one of the more powerful. I think both the Leibnizian cosmological argument, the argument from contingency, and the Kalam are extremely convincing. But the Kalam was the first one that I had heard, and then I really dug into, and I'm pretty sure I saw you guys do a video on William Lane Craig responding to objections to the Kalam. So I know you guys know the Kalam.
Well, so even better than that, we have a number of videos with my brother, who's a physicist, where we address the argument in terms of whether or not it is scientifically problematic, and I would say that it is. But we can get into that. Go ahead, keep going.
Okay, so premise number one, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise number two, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause. Which of the premises do you disagree with, and why?
Premise one.
Okay.
I have a lot of disagreements. Premise one. One, it assumes mereological realism, which, like, I'm okay with it granting in sake of argument, but I don't know what the actual argument is for part-whole relations. I think mereological nihilism actually ends up having much better supported arguments, though I'm very sympathetic to mereological realism. So the idea that something begins to exist is kind of presupposing that. I'm okay with shelving that. My issue is that I don't see an issue with a beginning that has no cause, right? If you're a naturalist and you just say that there's an initial state that's metaphysically necessary, and you use the same kind of tools that a lot of theists use, I mean, all you have to say is that there's an initial state in time, right? Mm-hmm. So at t = 0, you wouldn't say that, like, what caused that, because there isn't a moment prior to time, right? So the person who commits themselves to that view isn't going to be committed to breaking the metaphysical principle of, like, that, everything that begins to exist has a cause, or I'm sorry, that something comes from nothing in that sense, because there isn't a state of nothing prior to that. And so there isn't anything that caused it. It's an initial state that has no beginning. And I don't see any issue with that view. It's a view that a lot of naturalists take. It's a view that theists will probably take about God in some cases too, depending that if they think he has an initial state. But that's all.
I would add, sorry, I would just add that like, I don't believe that nothingness is a coherent concept. We can conceptualize nothingness. So I would agree that there is some fundamental aspect to reality that is necessary. Mm-hmm. But I see no reason to assume the state as having intention or desires or creative power in the sense of like a deity. And when people say, well, for the universe to exist, something outside of space and time must have caused it. We don't have any reference, from my perspective, to make sense of what timeless and spaceless would even mean linguistically. I think it's actually a word without content. We understand existence within a context of space and time, and so to me, that move doesn't really register. And I also think that to even talk about contingency versus necessary, we would need an access to ontology that I don't think we have in principle. I think these are all approximations. So I'm very skeptical of these approaches.
I don't know, Adam, whichever one you want to kind of address first. Maybe you want to
Sure.
spend a lot of time.
I'll try to, because you both presented similar points. I guess to start with, is there an example? So when you say you have a problem with something coming into existence, I know when I had talked to Cease prior, I gave the example of a bicycle coming into existence, right? And he told me, well, no, the bicycle, you can say it came into existence, but the matter had already existed, the metal and the rubber and the materials that it takes to make the bicycle. So in a sense, it did not come into existence.
Mhm.
But my next question to that would be did the bicycle exist beforehand? And
so the bicycle is going to exist. It's going to be a mind dependent kind of analysis on its utility. So like think of a chair, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a lot of borderline cases for chairs, right? Like what constitutes an actual chair? Well, like, I mean, your head, Adam, could be my chair, right? Like it could be, right? I could use it as a chair. It's not going to be dependent upon wood. It's not going to be dependent upon, like I could just grab water in the shape of a chair and freeze it. And then I got a chair for like an hour or however long. And the idea is going to be that at no point do you have this like definitive notion, this binary notion that it's a chair and it wasn't a chair.
Right.
What you have someone who takes non-chair material like lacquer and wood, nails, and they take the non-table material and make a table or a chair. And the utility and the function of a chair is completely mind dependent. It's dependent on the agent's like utility and desire. There isn't anything that begins to exist. It's just rearranging matter for the sake of a purpose for the agent. I don't see like where all of a sudden ontology is constituted in the same way that if I'm a bird flying over like a football stadium and say there's like band members making shapes, if there's a trillion band members making shapes and they're making like a football shape in there, like is it the trillionth band member that constitutes the ontology of the football? I don't know. Like this is the mereological nihilism thing. This is where I'm skeptical of mereological realism. There have fusion thesis, constitution thesis. They have all these types of theses. They all fail. It's like knowledge with the problem of the criterion or an epistemology. There's just like really no ways around this. Nobody's been successful at doing that. So I don't know why I would accept the first premise of the Kalam if we're just granting that things begin to exist based on like some some cognitive kind of limitation that we have on ourselves. But the main thing I have that's an issue is that even if I grant mereological realism, is that there can be a beginning without a cause. So the premise one is just false, right? You just have an initial state with no cause. There's nothing prior to it, no state prior to it that causes the initial state, right? It's just metaphysically necessary.
What example do you have of that?
What example does someone have that God's metaphysically necessary? Right?
It would just be
don't answer my question with a question. What I'm saying, like, what example do we have of something that's always been that doesn't have a cause?
It hasn't always been. There's an initial state.
Okay, so you're saying there was an initial state and the change from that. Like,
there's nothing. There's nothing prior to the initial state. There's no state of nothing from which the state comes from. Right? There isn't anything before it. There's no state of nothing. There just isn't anything. There's just an initial state.
I would add
so it'd be t equals 0. There wouldn't be prior to the first moment in time, right?
I would also add
the first moment in time, and it wasn't caused by anything because the first moment of time wouldn't have a cause before, especially if it's metaphysically necessary. You would just be saying it's contingent upon something. So I could just take some version of metaphysical modality that there's an initial state. All possible worlds share a history with the initial state. And nothing caused the initial state. It's just metaphysically necessary. It's more or less what a theist does with their view, right?
I would also add that I think
kind of
using words
I just shave off the unnecessary baggage. I don't see what explanatory role intentional states do.
I think the part of the problem is that using words like always existed, like our language fails us to.
Well, actually, I'm sorry, Cease, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
I just want to make this clear. In this view, at all points of time, the universe existed, right?
That's your claim?
Yeah, at all points of time, it's the initial state. At all points of time, the universe existed. I mean, would you disagree with that from that view?
I guess from what you're saying, all points of time,
Yep.
yes. All
And
points
there's
of time as physical time that,
Yeah.
that we live in. Yes.
And there isn't an initial state from which it comes from. And I'm not, so you wouldn't be violating a metaphysical principle that something comes from nothing, because there isn't a state prior to the initial state of time. And then you would just have a metaphysical I mean, if it was an infinite regression, I think it would be weird to call this metaphysically necessary. So when we talk about metaphysical modality, like a theist or anybody else does in this case, or if it's an Aristotelian notion, then we just have this initial state that isn't caused. There's nothing that causes that initial state of time. And then we can also say, without contradicting anything, that the universe has existed at all points of time.
So when we make historical references, right, where we say that the universe was, and I know, Cease, you were trying to say something. Did you want to say something before I?
I wanted to thank Briley, by the way, for making me remember that, because that was something that was crucial.
I was just going to say that I think part of the problem here is that our intuitions about time and space kind of don't really work out in light of modern physics. That we have these notions that just don't parse out very well. And so, I know people think, or some theists have suggested that somehow the idea of an eternal regress, which I know is not what Mike was talking about, but just as an idea, leads to some kind of paradox. And I don't believe it does. I think the issues are more linguistic than anything else. And I think that those things can be resolved once we kind of change our understanding of how time as a concept is being used in physics as opposed to our everyday intuitions of it. I don't think there was anything problematic about assuming because the opposite would be impossible. The idea nothingness, from my perspective, is not a concept. Like, we can't conceive of nothingness. So something must be. So fundamentally, some aspect of reality must always have existed. Saying always have existed tentatively, because I think these words are limited in conceptually. And so nothing about an initial state or a necessary state or a foundational state requires the assumption that a mind is necessary, that intention is necessary. Because what example of mind do we have independent of physical bodies? We don't have that. And so to assume that we
have evidence. Well, it depends on how you take it, right? If you don't believe in the supernatural, if you're not willing to consider the supernatural, then you're never going to believe that.
No, I'm
but like, for
willing to
example,
consider it.
there are 30 million documented cases of NDEs. Have you heard of this?
Yeah,
Near-death
of course.
experiences?
Yeah, I watched a
Right.
whole documentary about it. Yeah.
You can say that they're all crazy, right? But I think that's kind of unfair to say that it's not possible, that there's no
we wouldn't say they're
evidence.
crazy. It's just that if all we needed was anecdotal testimony from somebody having an NDE, and by the way, they always come back, so they had brain function at the time, it seems like, which is clear. But the thing though is that if we have these, we wouldn't have any need for like trial by jury if we just ask somebody about their NDEs, right? We're still left with the investigation. The fact that, like,
Sure,
it's the point I guess I would want to say is that NDEs are just going to be underdetermined by psychological facts, right? The same person can make the claim that, wow, all of these people have the same type of experience. What explains that? Oh, well, they all have a brain, and these types of things happen to brains under this distress or lack of oxygen or whatever. And both people are going to be able to explain that data. One's going to be simpler and probably preferred because we actually have the natural, data for it. But then in the other case, it's like, the fact that we have the anecdotal testimony isn't going to be enough. I mean, I would just go ask somebody, hey, did you do this crime? And they go, yeah, I didn't do it. Okay, great. You're innocent.
I want to clear something up real quick.
Of any trial by jury if we just looked at what people.
I want to make sure that I'm understood. I am not in principle saying that these things are impossible, that God can't exist or that miracles are impossible. I'm legitimately open to whatever is the case that can be shown to not be purely imaginary. I've researched near-death experiences. I don't deny that that these are real experiences. What I deny currently, because I don't think that those experiences support the conclusion, is that therefore consciousness is some process independent of the physical. We don't understand so much of what our brain is, how our brain
Mhm.
functions. What we do see is that when the brain is damaged, something about consciousness gets lost. And so, for me it seems strange to think that at death the brain could be destroyed completely, and yet you rise from your body, with the full capacity to still retain experience, as opposed to when you're having a near-death experience, some type of rare experience is being had of a certain kind.
Mhm.
I mean, they're not dead. Like they may be, I've heard the talk about like brain function, or there's not, what is it like? Um, there's no more brain waves or whatever. But that could be an issue of measurement. That could be an issue, not an issue of ontology for the physicalist. That could be an issue of we don't know how to actually measure what's going on, and there may be down the line a better understanding of what is actually happening.
So
Um,
let me mention real quick, and I wasn't expecting to get into NDEs. So
Sure.
if I was, I would have brought specific cases. But
We can go wherever you want, Adam. Just so you know, I don't want to
Yeah.
pigeonhole. Like this is free form, so however you guys want to go. If it's
Cool.
just something like, hey, I don't know, I have better evidence. We can go there, but I don't want to interrupt you.
No, cool. So as far as the NDEs are concerned, there are multiple cases, and I mean like hundreds of them. If I don't know if you ever heard of Dr. Gary Habermas, he's a New Testament scholar. He mentions NDEs a lot as part of his evidence for supernatural, but he has hundreds of documented cases that he can show you in his book, where the doctor will have a note on top of a machine that there's no way on earth this person in surgery could, or whatever the case may be, could have seen this note or code on top of, I can't think of the device that they put under when you're going to sleep, or whatever it may be. No way they could have seen it, but the doctor will concur that this is exactly what it said on top. There's no way this person could have seen that. And this happened multiple times. So there are
But how do we
convincing
investigate
stories.
that? Because like I get that
It's very difficult.
Because like I'm
It's-
not gonna just say it didn't happen, right? That would be like a level of hubris that I'm not really willing to take on. But I do find a concern that I understand that someone claims that, but it kind of goes back to the fact that, I mean, if I just accepted people's anecdotal testimonies on things, regardless of the amounts, like, I mean, there's 30,000 people that think they saw the sun move from the sky during the miracle of Fatima, and they were just wrong, right? I mean, if that had happened, there would have been devastating effects. We understand there was parhelion activity prior to that, and nobody actually ended up surveying any of the people to gain their immediate reactions.
I will look into it. Obviously I know of Habermas. We did a couple of videos on him. I will look into that specific thing.
Okay.
I don't even deny what you're saying. What I wonder is, how do we go from that observation, which let's say it's true, to consciousness is independent of the brain?
Oh, that would be one of many things you'd have to present to get to that, to dualism, to substance dualism. This is just when you had said that you don't see the evidence for the separation. I just kind of wanted to throw out a quick example of something, and then there is more that can lead you to dualism. But another thing,
we're probably all separate on this because I think he's a physicalist. I'm sympathetic to property dualism, and I guess you're a substance dualist. Right?
It seems to me that what you just described could be true, and physicalism still be true. That's what the issue I'm running into. Is that I'm not sure that it's from my interpretation that it makes dualism necessarily more likely.
So hey, let me jump in really quick and just say hi.
Hello, Brandon. How you doing? Yeah,
meeting you guys.
Of course, brother.
Yes. And I just wanted to say I appreciate Cease to Know's hat. That is a very nice hat there. And I actually have a Dragon Ball Z watch on.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, oh, great. Now I got two freaking nerds in the room.
Count three.
If I panned over here, part of my green screen's covering a Mortal Kombat arcade from like the 80s, so I'm a nerd too. So that's cool. Yeah.
Very good.
But no, Brandon, it's good to have you on. We appreciate you coming on. Go ahead. If you have anything you want to add or say or anything like that, go ahead.
I'm just trying to catch up a little bit on exactly what you guys are talking about. I haven't heard the last
So-
2 minutes.
so
before
We
I
this.
could
went
just
into the
set on a
Kalam.
reset on something if you want. You know, we could just go into
Okay.
something you want to go
Well,
into. Yeah, Adam, go
before
ahead.
before we do that, I wanted to ask Cease. You had mentioned that an infinite regress is not impossible. I guess that's a double negative, but is possible, and that's not like a logical issue. So you're okay. Like, what's your answer to the Grim Reaper paradox then?
Yeah, so I think that again, well, there's certain versions of the universe that don't even require an infinite regress. Like there are some versions that, think of, for example, a circle. Like you wouldn't say that a circle goes back, infinitely. It's like a self-contained thing. And some models of the universe look at the universe that way, where it's not that it is an infinite regress as the way we would think of like a timeline, but that it's self-contained. Now, I'm not saying I believe any one way, right? I'm agnostic as to what I think about what the universe actually is.
So are you? How do you feel about causal finitism then?
I think from the, and again, this is something that I really struggle with the philosophical implications of the way that causality and time is understood in physics. But in the conversations that I've had and the interviews I've had with the physicists on this channel, it seems as though causality is an emergent feature of reality, not a fundamental one. And so what we think of as the effects of causes, if we reverse the two, like imagine a tape or where we drop a glass on the ground and the glass shatters.
Mhm.
And normally we think of the cause of the glass shattering is that we drop the glass on the ground. Well, if we reverse the tape to the glass shattered on the ground coming back into my hand, nothing about the laws of physics have been violated. We would expect if the laws of physics were, what's what I'm thinking of? Oh man, this is where my English kills me.
Just say it in Italian and you'll sound sexy.
Yeah. If the laws of physics, this is going to sound stupid way of saying it, but I can't think of the word.
You get a pass. We all English is our native language, so you
Yeah.
get
Yes, you do get a pass. My goodness.
Give me 1 second.
Actually, no, my native language Japanese. and
I was
it's
actually I was gonna
perfectly-
assume that because we're just a bunch of like extremely white looking people up here. So.
Right.
The laws of physics don't seem to care about the error of time. Right? Obviously, I mean that metaphorically. Obviously, I'm not claiming that the laws of physics are sentient. What I'm saying is that they don't seem to care about the error of time. That we would expect if there was really an error of time, that something should be different about the past to the future, as opposed to yes.
Yeah,
So-
I'll just say here's from a physicist. There you go. That's the view I think. Stace, is that what you're trying to say? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'll try to prop that up. I don't know if that. I did want to say with the Grim Reaper thing, like what's the. So the thing that I'm interested in is like what's P and not P, because like someone like Craig is gonna agree that there's not a logical contradiction. I think a lot of people have backed off of that. I mean, I know there are people. I lean towards causal finitism, but that's a lot of it's due on.
Like I hear background noise. Are you moving? Something?
Oh, am I scratching the mic? I'm sorry. I was scratching the mic on accident. So for me, I don't. I if it has a contradiction, I don't have an issue because I lean towards causal finitism anyway. But I haven't really had anyone successfully like. I get Hilbert's Hotel. I get the Grim Reaper paradox, but like, I don't really see anybody just like really spelling out some contradiction that's not right. That's not going to have any kind of opposition towards where it's pretty precise, like a squared circle or something, right? I don't really see like if you have such an argument or you can derive the set of two inconsistent propositions, then like I'd love to hear it. I just don't really.
It's just more so that I think it's a logical absurdity. You can't, with the Grim Reaper paradox, right? Which Grim Reaper killed Fred? You'll never figure out because it goes on infinitely. And it's kind of goes like, if you want to connect that to the argument from contingency. Now, you guys, it seems that you believe that the universe is not contingent, that the universe has necessity in its own nature, whereas I take it a step further, of course, being a theist, and I think God is the necessity within its own nature, and the universe is contingent upon God. So do you think that the universe, space, time, and matter, and energy is infinite? You think it's always been?
Well, what I said earlier was that at all points in time the universe has existed. That doesn't imply like an infinite regress. It just implies that there's a moment in time. There's a first moment in time, and the universe has existed in all moments of time, right? And so the view for me is going to be the fine tuning of the constants, if we were to agree on that, are going to be necessary. Whereas on the theist view, that's going to be brutally contingent, and it's going to be brutally contingent because God could have had any desires for, say, like any other type of universe. I mean, there's
what is brutally contingent?
Yeah, I was gonna ask that.
Yeah, so it's going to be contingent upon God's desires, but it's going to bottom out. It's going to be brute, right? There's not going to be an explanation for why God has the desires that he does, instead of choosing world B with a different set of constants. Unless you want to claim that they're necessary, and then at that point you just shave off God, right? You just have necessary constants that couldn't be any other way, and the naturalist is going to end up winning.
Well, I don't see the issue with the motivation of God, because that could just be because he was lonely. You know, there could be multiple different explanations of what a mind could be. So I don't see that as being an objection.
But think about it this way: if you have a God who has a desire to create a world with just marbles in it, right? Finely tuned for just marbles, or finely tuned for, right? I don't know if we want to say an infinite, but there's an innumerable amount of desires God could have in any outcome that's going to be actualized or co-actualized by those desires. And we have what we're doing is we're looking at, like, say, the fine tuning, or whether it be contingency or whatever arguments, we're prompting something that God, the best explanation is there's an entity that has such a desire for the outcome. He has the ability to produce such an outcome, and he doesn't have any reasons not to produce such an outcome. That's going to be brutally contingent if we can't explain why God has the desires for world A versus world B. It's just, from the theists that I've talked to, it's just that's the desires that God has. Is the desire God wants this world. There's nothing really explains that.
I want to add one thing real quick.
Contingent. If it's necessary, then there aren't going to be other possible worlds. There's just going to be the one possible world, because he has one necessary desire, which corresponds to one metaphysically possible world, and then you're going to get what's called modal collapse. But presumably that's not what the theist wants to do. They're going to want to say it's contingent. That's where possibilities can diverge.
I just want to add one thing to
real quick, if I can finish. The thing that what I'm trying to say is, on a worldview comparison, the naturalist is going to favor, because if the theist just wants to say that it ends up being necessary, his desires are necessary, you get one world. If the naturalist is rivaling this view and just says there's the necessary constants, they can actually make two moves. They can say you get the one world modal collapse, or they can say, look, there's quantum chancy events that play out, and that's where, how do you get possibilities? Because chances diverge differently, so you can get a chance on A or B or C, and that's where you get some modal possibilities of contingency. The issue I have with the theist is I don't really know where your contingency props in if you want to say God's desires are necessary, right? You're going to have to want to make some claim that, like, he has contingent desires, and you can't explain why he wants the constants they do. They're just brutally contingent. I just find, why do we have the additional baggage when all the data is explained by the constants just being necessary? It serves no explanatory role.
Well,
to the intentions.
That would be, so my issue with that is, we've never observed, like you were talking about, the fine tuning of the universe, right? We've never observed, nature is chaotic, right? The second law of thermodynamics shows that entropy is always forever increasing. And of course, for the Big Bang to happen, you had to have your sort of low entropy state in the beginning in order for things to get to the way they are today. Mm-hmm. We're saying, on a naturalist point of view, that this happened unintentionally, unintelligently, and all by chance. You know, at best, you have your.
It wouldn't be by chance; it'd be metaphysically necessary.
But yeah, according to what? For what?
Huh?
Why though?
Why
is it necessary?
So
do we have to be here?
If you say something is necessary, right? Think of it this way: you say R is necessary, and you say, well, why R? Well, the explanation for why R is necessary is because it had to be. if you ask me the question,
but
well, why did it have to be? I feel like
confusing something.
you're pulling my leg.
No, Brendan. We're talking about like modal, or it's not modal logic technically, but the difference between contingency and
Metaphysical
necessity.
modality. Yeah.
Metaphysical modality.
Can
But one second, Cease. What I'm trying to say is, you just asked the same question about God. Like, we're going to get into a brute contingent, which is a contradiction, as far as his motives. But
No, it won't be a contradiction. It's just that
brute contingency is a contradiction.
Explain all the. No, it's not a contradiction. What's the contradiction in a brute contingency?
What can be brute and contingent?
Brute contingencies are used in the literature all the time. I don't know if that's the hill you want to die on. This is like a very
maybe I think we'll be understanding the concepts. Like, I think we're defining differently. Maybe define it.
It's contingent, right? But there isn't any further explanation on why it's contingent, right? There's no explanation for why it's contingent upon God, who is necessary, but there isn't any explanation for why God has the desire, like why he chooses world A versus world B. It's going to bottom out that it's just going to be brutally contingent from the theist view that he has the desires he has. Now, if I rival that as a naturalist, and I don't say the constants are necessary, but I take a similar view as you, I can say the initial state of the universe is necessary, right? There's an initial state, and then there's like a phase transition or a quantum chance where you just happen to get some set of possible outcome of constants, and that's no different than the theist move, right? There's a necessary thing, God, or the necessary initial state, and then there is just this contingent possibility. In my view, the way that I'm going to get those constants is through indeterminacy. The way that I avoid modal collapse and it's just necessary, I'm going to say there's a quantum chance, there's an indeterminate link, and it can go one way or the other. I can have all these different constants based on chance. The theist, if they want contingency, you're going to have to bake in indeterminate chances. Otherwise, you'll have modal collapse. It's just going to be the case that God has a necessary desire, and then you get a necessary world, and then you get modal collapse. So for me, it's just going to be way more parsimonious to accept the naturalist view. Plus, those theological costs that Jesus comes down indeterminately or Muhammad gets a message indeterminately is not going to be like very comfortable for the theist in order for them to get contingency. I guess my claim is that you don't get contingency without positing some type of indeterminate link.
Well, I just want to add something.
It's going to be necessary the whole way through.
I just want to add something real quick because I don't want you to feel like I'm dodging your question about infinity that you asked me earlier. I guess what I'm trying to say is that these seemingly paradoxical issues we run into, I think, have more to do with our failure of language and the ways our minds are structured to intuit certain things, than whether or not some kind of infinity is ontologically impossible. I think that any issues with infinity that you can come up with for my worldview is also going to be the case for your worldview. When you think about God always having been, or when you think about heaven not being finite, there being an eternity with God. I think in both worldviews, there's going to be some tension there as to how do we really make sense of this notion of infinity. I'm not saying that I believe one way or another. I'm very open and fairly agnostic about what the origin of the universe is, what the nature of time is. I'm comfortable saying that I really don't know, and that I'm still trying to figure it out as I study science further and whatnot. But I don't think that these issues are defeaters for my worldview any more than I think they're problems for yours as well.
So what if we said that we believe that God is outside of time?
So that's why I said something. I addressed that earlier before we came in. Is that I think how I would say how I answer that is that I don't think that sentence has linguistic content, because when we think of existence, the reference that we have for existence is of things within space and time. And so when you say outside of space and time, I have no concept of what that means any more than I have a concept of what nothingness could be. I don't think that's actually saying anything. I don't mean that in like an offensive way.
Okay, well, I mean, there has to be some way for us to communicate the possibility of a being being the creator of time or something outside of that. Like, that's conceivable. The language might fail in some degree, but like that doesn't mean that the concept doesn't exist altogether,
Oh,
because
I
we
think
might
for
have an
me
issue in explaining it.
that might be part of the problem from my perspective as to why I'm not a theist. And
Okay.
maybe Mike, you can explain this better than I can when you're talking about the externalist internalist issue with the idea of God. Do you know what I'm talking about?
What did
I'm
you
sorry,
say? Could you say that
the
again?
internalist externalist thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
in relation of God, this is one of the reasons why I struggle with the theistic perspective.
Oh wait, are you talking about? So are you talking about the God as a mind, sans creation or prior to creation? God as a mind that exists alone.
Like
As-
outside of like this idea that you can have existence, not
or a
at the top
perception of a perception or a mind or perception without an actual world to perceive.
right. I think that's
Yeah,
problematic.
that's something that's. I mean, this is. I don't know. This is necessarily a very strong argument, but we could just have some argument like if a mind requires a world to perceive, right? Then internalism about content for like a god is just going to be false, right? You're gonna have if what it means to be a mind is to perceive a world or to have desires in referent of objects or to have the thoughts in your mind furnished by external content, it does seem like incoherent for a notion where there's an entity that only furnishes its thoughts internally. It doesn't even it just seems like a contradiction on what it means to be a mind to have the perception of a world. But further, there's just going to be an issue with like omniscience, because if God is a mind that exists alone and he doesn't have an external world, then if it's the case that he's a brain in a vat, then any entity that thinks his mind is the only thing that furnishes his content can't actually justify the fact that he's not a brain in a vat. And so it just seems like omniscience is impossible, given the fact that Cartesian skeptical scenarios like being a brain in a vat only really affect people directly who are internalist about mental content, right? That only thing that's going on is your mind. That would just mean precisely God wouldn't have access of knowing he's a brain in a vat or not knowing he's a brain in a vat. But that's all separate point. But yeah, the internalist thing bothers me. I don't know if we need to go into that. That's an argument that I would, that's been put forth by Darth Arianis and some other people that I think is an argument that's successful against omniscience.
I mean,
But
this
the
might be
first part, I don't know.
this might be my limitation. Like, it may be that I am not comprehending something that other people, maybe other things, have access to. But when you say that, when you talk about existence outside of space and time, I legitimately cannot comprehend that. Like, linguistically, I don't know.
You're not alone, man.
So, but
Yeah,
but it's worse than that. Like, well,
as
sorry,
Christians, we actually do. Sorry, not to cut you off. We also have these kind of discussions on, what are the properties of God that are, kind of emergent, and what are the ones that are essential to his nature. And I guess that's what you were getting at, with saying that maybe a mind by definition needs something to perceive in order to be a mind. So how are you a mind before anything exists? We understand that. Although I'm not so sure that a mind necessarily requires that. But
sure, that'd be that'd be the contention for sure.
Okay, but in Christianity, of course, we have the doctrine of the Trinity, and so one thing that we this isn't a conversation that we'll usually have with people outside of the church much, but it's that because of the Trinity, there's three persons in one essence. What we believe, that there's always room for relationship, even outside of time, space, and matter, because there's always three persons, and so that's how God can be defined as love, like it says in 1 John 4:7, because he can always love someone else in the Godhead. Like, that actually makes sense. But God can't be, for example, essentially sovereign, because sovereignty implies you have to be sovereign over something else, right? So like, it would be more of his character, for example, to be love rather than that, that sovereignty would only emerge upon creating the universe. And so I'm actually fine with omniscience being an emergence property also, that only because he created the whole universe does he, by definition, pretty much know everything in the universe.
But the problem that I run into fundamentally is that when we talk about existence, when we talk about intention, we talk about creation, we talk about love, all those things, all those concepts, I only understand within a context of space and time. that's the problem I run into. So when you use those words and those ideas and put them outside of the context from which we understand linguistically, that's where I think there's a problem. Like Briley
Okay.
right here, like he said, what does it actually mean to exist for no time and in no place?
Okay.
I think existence
So,
to me
but-
entails time and space is the issue.
Well, I mean, as humans, just going off of the best reason that we can. I mean, I know as humans, all of us are not going to be able to understand, what it means to be outside of time. A lot of times you'll hear people say, well, what did God do before he created the universe? Well, hold up. We already have a contradiction there. There's no before the universe if, all time, space, and matter is locked up in the universe. So yeah, that makes sense. And it makes sense that we wouldn't be able to fully comprehend that. But can we try to talk about these things to understand them? Could it still be somehow true beyond our ability to express it? I think that's true. Just because something might be hard for us to understand doesn't mean that it wouldn't be true.
So-
And like in Christianity, we're very familiar with this. Back to the Trinity example, we're literally saying there's three persons in one essence. And
Yeah,
that comes from just the sum of biblical revelation. That's just the best that we
Yeah.
have. So
can
and,
I ask you about that just real quick? Because I'm
Well-
kind of curious. Like, do you
Hold
take
on.
that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit they're distinct persons,
yes, sir.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would take.
and so that they're not going to be like identical to one another?
That's correct.
Okay,
Mm,
great.
that
So
would be
do you
illogical.
think that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are distinct persons in terms of predication?
Okay, could you define predication for me as far as like making actions?
Well, yeah. So like, I'm just kind of curious, and like, presumably you're not saying that they're identical in identity, right? But like maybe that like some notion is like predicated upon, or like some type of I'm trying to use an example of like if I said like if I predicated on like say J Mike has blue eyes or brown eyes or something like that, right? As opposed to like or like say J Mike is a coder or something like that. Like I predicate on like something like that as opposed to like I am identical to a coder or something like that. I mean, do you take a notion of like I'm trying to just see where your view is on the Trinity,
Okay.
and whether or not they're like identical, or how do you take that view?
Yeah, the best that we have from scripture, is that, and I say the best because it's not the easiest for humanity to understand this. Which, by the way, as a classical apologist, and all of Truth Over Tea, this is what we do is classical apologetics, is we'll look to support biblical claims based on shared body of knowledge, so history, science, logic, reason, philosophy, right? And then after that, after coming to some conclusion that the Bible is God's word, then you go to, okay, well, what did God reveal about himself? Oh, it looks like he's three persons in one essence. Okay, that's not something that will go, you see, Christianity is right necessarily because of the Trinity. That's something that we would then go to later on. Just saying. But yeah, it's the Trinity is three distinct persons that have three distinct roles, that they do different things, but they all are one essence. So you say Jesus is God, the Holy Spirit is God, the Father is God.
It seems weird because it's like where you're like using the is of identity and predication. So it's like I don't know how they'd be co-equal or co-eternal. If
there's a debate on co-eternal now. I mean, no, co-equal. That's
Okay.
the debate.
Yeah, we don't have to get into that whole thing.
no.
I was just kind of more curious. I wasn't trying to like.
I want to
like-
address.
Yeah,
one thing
that's
that
a
was
long
said.
that's a long discussion, but I see what you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, yeah.
I want to address something that Brendan
I
said.
know a lot of people take different views on that, obviously. So
You said two things, Brendan. One I agree with, and one I don't. I agree that what is true about reality is independent of our capacity to understand it or not. Obviously, right? Like our perception is not what dictates what is the case. However, I don't agree that if we don't understand something or have no access to comprehending this thing, that we can still talk about it in any kind of coherent way. I'm saying as a matter of principle, to talk about existence outside of space and time has no possible reference that makes any sense. So the sentence this is what I was basically saying, isn't coherent unless you can define existence without reference to time or location.
So I wanted to mention something to what you just said, Cease, because this is something I wanted to say to Mike. Oh, well, he left. Nope. He's
Sorry,
back?
Oh, he's back.
eating a sandwich.
Okay.
Disconnected my. Oh, I got some crumbs. All right, I'm an idiot. I put a sandwich in the freezer, waited for it to dethaw. I'm at that moment, so go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. So
You're good, man.
we're talking about the first moment in time, or the initial moment in time earlier, and like what you were just saying, if we can't comprehend it, then why are we entertaining it, for lack of a better term? As far as like, there's been no explanation from an atheistic point of view in general, or a naturalistic point of view of what that cause was. Now, what Mike was saying earlier is you don't need a cause for that first moment in time. Are you both consistent on that same view? You don't believe, Cease, you don't believe that there needs to be a cause for the first moment in time?
I think we hold different views on that.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think what we would call the first cause, if we want to take, again, I'm agnostic as to all of this, but if I
Okay.
was to assume a first cause, which again, based on what I said earlier about cause and effect, I think it's problematic to look at causality in the fundamental way, as opposed to an emergent feature of reality. But let's say that it is fundamental, just for the sake of argument. I would say that the initial cause is the necessary foundation of reality, the initial state that in some sense always was, but I don't attribute a mind or intention or desires to that state. I view it as a natural necessity. And so that would be the one thing that's not caused, that caused everything else, but it wouldn't be a God with intention.
Why don't you attribute a mind to that, just out of curiosity?
Because it seems like an additional unnecessary assumption. And because we have no evidence of a immaterial, one is because I have issues with the whole idea of something immaterial anyway, as a matter of principle, but also because I don't think there's any good evidence to believe in mind independent of brain. That to think that also the mind-body problem, like how does the mind, of dualism, how does the mental affect the physical? I'm not a dualist. I think that it makes much more sense to view everything as a monism. So I think it just complicates things.
Don't
well,
you
Adam,
kind of run
I know you have something to say on that, but what I wanted to say first was, what about, all right, so for us to have a beginning to the universe, a first cause, and then you're saying that cause didn't necessarily have to be a mind. What are your options if it's not a mind? I was thinking if it's not going to be a mind, then all you have is either an impersonal force or a person.
I would say some law of physics, some
well, this is the
necessary
beginning
nature
of all physics. So
and
how can the physics cause the beginning of all physics?
Well, because what I'm saying is that it would be, the laws of physics we observe now would be secondary to some initial necessary foundation that was always the case. There was some aspect.
Do you find forces in physics, one of the fundamental four forces, do they start and stop at a whim?
I would say that when we think of forces, and again, I'm not a physicist by any means, but I think they're more, and I wish my brother was still.
Well, we got to remember, like in the earlier, I think it's I don't know what epoch, but there's a grand unification epoch, right? The fundamental forces are actually one before they decouple through like a series of epochs. So that's off the top of my head. I'm not a physicist.
I've never heard
There's
that.
also one thing I want to show.
Someone like Guido, you know this stuff, so you tell me if I'm wrong. Is it the case that well, I mean, I don't know if this is important to your kind of notion, but I just wanted as like a point to make sure that we aren't just like separating them, because at one point during an epoch there's a grand unification epoch, which over time, like depending on how the temperatures change, I guess in kelvins or whatever, you get a decoupling of the fundamental forces. So
Okay.
I don't know if that's
I have
important
heard
to your
that.
view or not, but I just wanted to kind
Yeah,
of
I just wanted to add that I don't think there's anything problematic about thinking of forces as,
I'll take that as
potentially
true.
changing over time.
Oh,
Like, I think these are descriptive more than prescriptive.
So
So-
changing, I think, is okay, but like maybe with the fundamental epoch, okay. But what you'd have to have for the universe to start beginning at some point would be it's like a switch had to flip, something had to turn on, and for an impersonal force doesn't have the ability to do that. Like that to me, that seems like a choice, and so only a person can take a state of nothingness and then convert it to a state of something. It seems like a choice had to flip a switch.
Right. So that fundamentally, I don't think that nothingness means again, one of those words that I don't think means anything. I don't think nothingness is a thing. So
I
I
mean,
think-
okay, I don't have to say nothingness. I could just say, because we just agreed just based on earlier conversation. Well, actually, you may not have agreed on this. I won't.
Well,
say that,
for
but
me,
I
there
won't put
wouldn't
words in
be
your
a
mouth.
state of nothing prior.
What did you say, Mike?
There wouldn't be a state of nothing. There isn't a state. This is the thing that I think gets confusing. There isn't a state prior, right, to the first moment in time from which the first moment of time comes from. So there isn't a state of nothing, right? It didn't come from anything.
Because it's like illogical to say prior before time.
Well, there's a first moment in time, and it's necessary. So if it's metaphysically necessary, then it would be contingent when you prompt up something prior to it, right?
I want to show a couple
All we have
comments
to
here.
say is there's a start.
Yeah,
The word start
a necessary
implies-
initial natural state.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
And that
also-
implies, I think, something beyond what really a natural force can do, because natural forces continue
I don't
They
think
don't
that's true.
start.
I don't think that.
based on observation.
Yeah, but I think that it's assuming. I don't see any contradiction in holding the metaphysical position that this change could have been from a physical force, because we see change all the time. Like we see, for example, evolution. There's no will there that's leading to the changes and the adaptation that it does. There's no. I mean, of course, you're going to think there is, because from your theistic perspective, but
Wait,
from my perspective, there isn't. Right? Like I don't. When I look at these natural processes taking place, I don't see intention. I don't see design. I don't see a will. I see nature doing what nature does, for whatever reason that is. And you might think of it as chance, but I don't think that the option is between God or chance. I think it's between God and nature just being what nature does.
It's also
But
strange that if it's designed, it's like 99% of all the species. Like if there was some success mechanism there, that you wouldn't have
That was going to be
0.1% of the species that end right.
yeah,
Like
that was going
that
to be
actually lived? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, 99.9% of all species are extinct.
And,
Right?
and that was going to be the argument I
So-
was going to say earlier about the fine
I'll let
tuning.
Cease go.
Seems
sorry,
to be very
sorry,
natural to me.
I'll
but
probably
that's
shut
just
up
my
about
bias.
But the only thing I was going to say about the fine tuning is that actually, for me, it's a point against theism, because I would expect, if the goal for God was for life to emerge, that actually it wouldn't matter how the constants were changed. Life would still emerge under the theistic perspective. We would expect life to emerge regardless
So
of the nature of
wait a minute though. So we have no evidence. We have yet to prove how the first life began. You have Lee Cronin over at the University of Cambridge, who's probably the most well-known of the origin of life chemists, that is trying his hardest to do it, but he has yet to do it. And every time he's claimed that he did it, he had to correct himself and say, we cheated. And then even if they do it, you still had human intervention there to have that experiment complete, to supposedly create the first life or microbe, whatever you want to call it. So we don't even know how that happened. We just assume that happened. So that's just an
but
assertion.
a lot of that. The thing is that you put that. I mean, it's really hard to do. You have these they're gonna be devoured very quickly, right? It's not gonna. The whole point is you're gonna have to have control. We're gonna have to try to find ways to do it, because like in the environment, what we're missing is a lot of precursors, right? This is like where the protein argument, a lot of these things come in, is like they assume probabilities on things without assuming like certain precursors that are important to these theories. And so you don't get the probability on these things without that. But like the peer-reviewed studies in like RNA on clay just seem to just completely different. Like I'm not saying that abiogenesis or anything is like full 100%. We're still have a lot of work to do. But to say that there isn't evidence or predictions that are being made that are being confirmed by hypotheses would just be false, right? I mean, that's precisely what they're doing with RNA on clay. They're making novel predictions. They've confirmed novel predictions. They haven't generated predictive success from the intelligent designer case. And when we compare the hypotheses that you end up having boils down this way to me. And I'm not trying to be uncharitable or anything. This is how I view the theist hypothesis. There's an outcome. What explains the outcome? Well, what explains it is an entity that desires such an outcome, has the ability to produce such an outcome, and doesn't have reasons not to produce such an outcome. You can explain any set of data with that, right? If someone's used a really good example of a shoe stealing fairy, and I've kind of adopted a different version. That think about it like if I had really good Mondays for like a couple weeks, and then maybe a few years, maybe like 10 years of really, really good Mondays, I could explain the data and say, well, what actually is the reason why I'm having like fine-tuned Mondays or something like that is that there's actually an entity that desires me to have good Mondays. It doesn't have countervailing reasons not to give me good Mondays, and it has the ability to produce it. And those are good Monday fairies. And every time I have a good Monday, we could just say that's evidence towards the hypothesis. But that's like a really weak way to construct evidence for the hypothesis. And I don't see that the theist hypothesis is doing anything different than the good day Monday or the good day fairy hypothesis to explain the data of good Mondays.
That's another form of God of the gaps, what you're saying.
Yeah. So I see what you're saying, but the problem is
it just seems like the hypothesis can explain any phenomena that you want it to.
Yeah, and Brendan, based on what you just said, that's what I was going to say in response to what to you was that I can agree with you. You know, the science has limitations. There are wide open questions to certain aspects of our reality. If anything, I don't even believe that science produces certainty. Like I'm generally skeptical.
Yeah.
I don't think any limitation of science gives credence to God being an explanation. To me, theism functions more as a narrative to try to explain. You know, it's like you said. To me, it sounds like a God of the gaps type of thing.
Okay.
So let me quick, Brendan. I wanted to address what Mike has said. So he addressed one side of the coin, but when you flip that's the other side of the coin, it's that all these chemicals or everything just so happen to be at the right spot at the right time with no intelligence behind it, and bam, the first life. So what's more rational to believe? That would be my issue.
Well, sure, but I mean, if I'm saying that what explains, if we're going to I don't know if we're specifically going to like the initial state, there's not going to be an issue with the natural step posits that they're necessary because the charge on chance is just false, right? It's metaphysically necessary. I'm not going to say like
the first life is not metaphysical. I mean, it would be
if you're going to life or something like that. It's not going to be quantum chances. It's going to be determinate, antecedent, prior.
And the same thing could be applied to your view, Adam, because we could say, well, why is it that God is the way that God is? Ultimately, it's always going to be, it just is the case that...
Exactly. The necessity charge to charge against me or a naturalist is the same charge I can ask about you and God's properties or anything like that. My point is that what's available to the theist is available to the naturalist, right? And it only seems to point out, yes, with metaphysical necessity, yes, it is. It's not
with that theism. Principle, but what you're leaving out is the intelligence factor. God has.
I don't need it in my view, though. Why do I need intentional states in my view?
What I'm saying
what
is,
does it do to actually explain the data that my view?
Well, he says that I think for him it makes it more rational to believe.
I think it's more rational to believe, and this is what led me to my
whole. But in virtue of what?
What do you mean in virtue of what?
In virtue of what is it more rational than the theist, than the naturalist?
So we've never observed anything get created by something unintelligent. Other than procreation in animals, right? They will procreate their own species over and over again. Other than that, anything that's created, a house, a building, a car, a bicycle, an airplane, any type of engine, a gun, all created by intelligent beings, right? So to me, it's okay. So anything that's created with some form of complexity had an intelligence behind it. So you're going to say that DNA, the anatomy of the human being, was all created, or it's came into being unintelligently.
Well,
to
if it
me,
was
seems-
intelligent, it wouldn't be unnecessarily complex. It would actually streamline. Like, right, it's not complexity isn't going to even be, in my opinion, a hallmark of design. Simplicity is going to be a hallmark of design. Right?
You're saying
As a coder, I'm not going to make my code unnecessarily complex or have all these issues. I'm going to, especially if I'm omnipotent and I have like the ability to of foresight, divine foresight, then clearly, right, it's going to be, if it's designed and it's not just this like, oh, the fall happens and it goes this way on its own, but rather it's intelligently designed, then there just seems to be one issue on the fact that complexity is not a hallmark of design. Simplicity is a hallmark of design.
And I would,
So you're saying,
But secondly, and I think probably most importantly, is that there might be some issue of a composition fallacy there. Because if you just look at the world and you're like if you just want to make some claim that it's the case that this...
Well, that's why I said it was just more, to me, it's more rational to avoid the composition fallacy. What I'm trying to state, it's not saying that it's true. I can't say that makes it true. That would hit the composition fallacy.
Sure.
But by stating that I think it's more rational, that keeps me away from the composition fallacy.
sorry,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just stating that's...
Okay. So I actually think you're making a fallacy.
Adam, or you, whichever one of you finish. just...
I think you're actually making a fallacy there, because I think you're comparing organic matter with artificial things that we have a reference for as far as design. If I look at a house, I can infer that it was created and was designed because I have an empirical basis for houses being designed. So I understand the intuition why it sounds like it would be more rational. But when we look at what science is actually telling us, is that no, these things, complexity, and can be explained through a natural process that actually doesn't require intelligence, doesn't require design, but actually takes place in these other ways. And it's like, this is, I think, the fallacy from design, right? Like, if you think of what is the example? Just because two things share an attribute doesn't mean that they share all attributes. So if you think of a watch being designed and the universe being designed, well, a watch was created in the 1800s. Doesn't mean that the universe was created in the 1800s. Like, just because two things share...
But that's not equivalent to the argument that I'm making.
But you're saying we see complexity. We haven't seen an example of complexity that's not designed, therefore it's reasonable to assume design overall. I'm saying that's fallacious because you're taking one attribute and saying that it must apply to two things, that all other attributes for those two things also must apply.
I mean, all of our observational experience would be in favor of when you have, and it's not just complexity, but it's specified complexity. You need a designer. From all of it. I mean, from the abiogenesis argument, I mean, we could go into more detail on that, but we're just lacking data on it being that just comes about another way. I mean, if there was another way, I mean, I'd like to know. And this is kind of what we're getting at with the God of the Gaps fallacy thing, just to say that quickly I know we were talking about that earlier. We're actually asserting that the trend shows that when you have some kind of specified complexity, it shows that there's a designer. We're not saying, oh, we haven't found the trend. We haven't found the answer for this. And so as a result, it must be God. No, we have. We've seen everything on Earth that we can. And this is a pretty scientific method because it's very highly based on observation. And from what we can see from that, there must be some sort of designer for things like this.
But the problem I have with the observation thing is precisely this. And I'm glad Briley brought this up. The argument that this thing looks designed, therefore there's a designer, the same type of sequitur that you could level against me as if I said snowflakes spontaneously form, therefore the universe spontaneously formed, right? You would charge
all
me
I'm
against
saying
that.
Is
also,
it's more likely
that
that
also snowflakes aren't designed. We watch them not be designed. Briley makes a good point. And they are arguably pretty complex, especially the fact that they spontaneously form in such.
How complex? Pretty complex.
I would say they're complex,
as
right?
Complex as the bacterial flagellum.
Well, I mean, so one of the things that's going to be strange, though, is that you want to talk about design in the view and complexity, But the thing I'm like somewhat weird about, I hope this isn't completely off the mark in a way, but from like Cease's view and my view, if we assume the truth of both of our views for the sake of like the argument, we just move between the two. In our view,
Bradley also made a good point here.
In our view, yes, this is literally so. This is actually what I was going to say.
Okay.
If in our view, we actually have non-design things, like assuming naturalism is true, there's rocks, there's wood, like trees. We build houses out of them. We have background information on when we come up to a house. Why we think it's designed is based on background information that we have. And on your view, God designed everything. Everything is designed. So when we really look at the views, what ends up happening is it seems that Cease and Mike can actually pick up like two things, like a watch and metal, and we can adjudicate which thing in our worldview is designed versus not designed. But in your worldview, everything is designed. You don't even have a basis of comparison to know what a non-designed thing looks like. So it seems really strange, like how we're getting off the ground on theism on this, when you don't have a comparative basis, where the naturalist does have a comparative basis. Their worldview can't account for design and non-design.
And
okay. Now, what we're saying.
By the way, my buddy Danny asked that to Frank Turek, and there's a video of it. And Frank Turek just like completely. During a conference. Frank Turek doesn't even know how to answer the question. It's the exact same thing that I just prompted up. So I urge everybody to go watch that on Phil. Shout out to Phil Talk, Danny.
I'm gonna go talk to Frank Turek and see what he thinks of this. Then,
no. Wait, are you in actual communication with him?
Am I? No.
No, that's awesome. You are asking about.
I am local to him. I am.
Yeah, you're right. You are.
So I can go to his church.
What are the chances that you could get him to come on here? Well, probably non-existent, right?
He's a humble dude, but I'm not gonna make any promises there.
That'd be cool. Well, Adam and Brendan, we're happy that you guys are here. So
we appreciate being on.
Yeah, no, this is
any theist willing to come on, you have to give respect because you're willing to defend your positions and all that. So I give it immediate respect for that.
But yeah, just real quick, like I said before, for me, when we're talking about things that we know are designed, is because the only reason why we know they're designed is because we've observed it, and I don't think we can make an inference or compare artificial things to organic matter as being designed. I don't think that follows from my perspective.
Well, here, let me address what Mike was saying earlier. I mean, you're right. I mean, we do believe that God created, a mind created all matter, space and time. And so everything has hallmarks of design in it, or marks of design. But what we do, though, is we try to go into the scientific realm and not assume something based on that, and then we go, like, into the same realm that you operate from, and we say, okay, well, rocks don't really show appearance of design. Water doesn't really show that. We just assume that from the outset, but then from there you see things that are designed. And even when we do that, when we plant ourselves in your shoes and then we look for signs of design, there's always a designer behind it. It's from that perspective is where we still get to. There always is some designer, which makes us break the secular worldview, then have to land in the theistic one because it seems to demand it.
But how do you know what a non-designed thing even is?
So here's the thing, though, with what you were saying, to add to that, even on the naturalistic worldview, nature is somewhat of a force of change. It changes things through whether it's natural selection, whatever. So nature is designing unintelligently, whether it's through natural selection, whether it's through forming a waterfall. Nature is what's designing.
But the design on that notion is divorced from intentional states, whereas the design in the other case is tethered to intentional states. So I don't want to equivocate. So I wouldn't actually agree.
It's still design.
If we're using the same utterance. Well, no, because the word. So I'm okay with the same grunt that's being used, but I want to make sure that I'm parsing out what I mean by the grunt. When you say that, or what I would agree to versus what's entailed by your view. I don't accept that intentional states like beliefs, desires, and intentions are involved in that, whereas you do, and that's
correct.
Clearly the fundamental disagreement. And so that's going to be a problem for me to agree that it's designed. It's not designed, it's dispositional states. They have causal tendencies. So I would actually design versus would imply a normative notion to me, right? That there's success to the design or failure to the design. I don't think that natural properties have success and failure measures. I think that they just have dispositional properties and they just have tendencies. So like using design, I'm already skeptical on because that's a normative notion that I'm not actually going to agree with.
So when there are certain artists that just kind of splat paint on a canvas, right? They don't necessarily have a specific design in mind. They're just very, I don't want to. The term is a very open-minded artist, for lack of a better term. It's just splats paint on the canvas. They may not have had a specific design in mind, but now you have paint on the canvas, no matter how many colors. Would you say that wasn't design because there was no success or failure that could have came from that?
That still entails some kind of intention of some sort. Some kind of
there's an intent. Yeah, exactly. There's an intention. If they miss if their intention was to splatter it and it misses it, then they failed with respect to the intention.
I think when we look at nature,
I think nature has at all.
I think when we look at nature, it is an error to look at nature and assume that organic matter should be comparable to artificial things that we have an empirical basis to know are designed. That's an inference.
Well, what is artificial things, right? Because everything artificially broken down is from raw materials.
Yeah, sure, of course, but it's. When we build we don't find houses the way that we conceive of houses. Like we were talking about, objects earlier, how this is like a more of an issue of function than ontology, right? We look at a brick house. Well, we don't find a brick house naturally. It's something that we build. We have an empirical basis to know it's been built. We have observations to see it's been built. But does it make sense to go from seeing that process to then assume that the universe must be designed as well because we see the house designed? I think we're comparing apples and oranges here. I think I don't think the idea that the universe or reality must be designed because some things are designed makes any sense. Let me phrase it this way. I think design is an emergent feature of reality, not a fundamental one. That's the easiest way I can say that.
Well, let me try this thought experiment quick. You guys may have heard of this, I don't know, but say you find we're all walking in the woods. Adam might know what I'm talking about, and we find a glass ball chilling on the ground. We would assume it's made of glass. It's a sphere. It's hollow.
Probably a pothead left it in the woods. It's a bowl. No,
that's what it is. Okay. All right. Now, say it wasn't just like a ball, like a soccer ball, but it was huge, like as big as a house. You would still think, wow, I mean, this is kind of impressive, but somebody built that. Somebody put that there. All right. Now, say it was as big as a mountain or something. It would be really impressive. It would be amazing. And we probably would still have no problem saying it's design, but if it's as big as the whole universe, that's not design though. That came about some other way.
No. So I think
there's no background information of designing things like, where we just like go to depths that we haven't gone to, right? So there wouldn't be, the whole point that Cease is stressing is background information, and the thing that would be divorced there would be some type of background information. If you present something where it's like that, we might just not know whether it is or not. We might have to investigate or update more information as we go and say, oh, actually, it turns out it is. If you're just talking about something that's the size of the universe, I mean, that wouldn't be the case. I mean, it's just either like if it's the same size of the universe, how does that work? I don't even know how that thought experiment
works. No, he's making the comparison.
So
like, why do we assume?
Well, go ahead, Cease. I'm sorry.
Well, from my understanding, you're saying why, if we find something in nature that appears designed, why wouldn't we assume that the universe is, right?
It's just saying that it nails it down to
Correct.
The only thing that determines design is specified complexity. It's not placement on the timeline or So I mean, it's just like because of that, the universe is filled with an immense amount. I mean, it just to where it requires that, even to the point where you have people like, anytime you don't believe in the steady state theory, of the infinite regress, you end up believing that, oh no, God now has his defined foot in the door. I mean, that's what Einstein believed. That's why he eventually became a pantheist, but favored the steady state theory, was because it prevented the need for God. But once you have the beginning of the universe, knowing how complex it is,
But that is primarily
requires-
what I'm arguing against. Is to me, it's an assumption to think that complexity suggests design. I think we have better explanations to make sense of how complexity arises in nature that doesn't assume design. In fact,
So what are those better explanations, though? I hear people say that a lot, and nobody gives me a specific explanation of like DNA, right? What would be a good explanation for a 300 million or billion, these million letter code that goes throughout your body to determine your genetic structure
how many nucleotides are there?
throughout your whole
I
body?
don't know, not a
No,
biologist.
well, no, I'm saying how many are there?
Nitrogen bases.
Or
4?
nucleotides 4. Yeah,
Yeah,
throughout your
wait,
DNA.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if as a coder, if like I just had 4 things to code with and I just like mashed them down, like, do you think that's like a really good code?
That's gonna go. So I mean, you can say it's not a
Oh
good
yeah,
code,
you're a
but
sound. I mean, sorry.
Well, I would add that, from my understanding, simplicity is a better example of design than complexity. And why would there even be a need for an immaterial God to require any sort of what's the word I'm thinking of? Specific conditions to lead to like that doesn't make sense to me. I don't think so. You asked what leads to it. Again, I think that we look at things, processes like evolution. This is going to be the problem, though, right? Because I'm going to look at evolution and, from my perspective and my intuitions, not see design, see that there's aspects that are random mutations. There are aspects that are
Exactly. There's
environmental
no
pressures.
design or engineering involved in the way that me as a coder would be, right? It's like there's an equivocation that's happening. Like we can agree that code
presuppositions.
And if you
we could agree on the code being something like instructions for like the development of functions of organisms, and that's fine. But like when you start talking about code in the sense of it being like the product of a human, the way that we analyze this is an equivocation, because random, there isn't anything that's designed about the random chance of like mutation, right? And the fact that we have such a gradual process over time is not a hallmark of some design in that sense.
I don't think that's a presupposition.
Well,
I don't know how that's best explained by theism over
naturalism. That's you assuming the intention, though, right? Now, to be fair,
well, yeah, of an omnipotent creator and an omniscient one, it should,
But again, that doesn't mean that his intentions are what you desire them to be.
Right.
They can have their own independent intentions.
He could just be a bad designer, basically.
Or
let's look at the iPhone, for example, right? Your iPhone, looks like this, nice, convenient. It would be nice if they had a battery that lasted forever, or let's say that lasted a month, a battery that you could charge just one time for a month. Right? Does that imply that the phone was designed badly because you have to charge your phone every day or every other day, depending on how often you use it? No, the intention was to have a conveniently shaped phone that can fit in your pocket, fit in your hand, do whatever with. If you had a battery that lasted a month or 2 months, you'd probably have a block phone or have like something as big as the old Nokias back in the day. So it's the intention of the designer has a lot to play in this kind of view, right? So we can't just say because there are flaws, therefore there's no designer. I think that's non sequitur. Logic doesn't follow.
Well,
I just want to point out, Pastor John is calling me.
Oh, well. I think we
buddy
can.
I thought it said Pentagon.
Boy, Christian friend of mine. We talk on the phone a lot about.
I think we can say that
cool.
depending on how you're defining God. I think the fact that the observations that are flaws would undermine certain notions of God depending on how you're defining it. I agree, not necessarily. But again, I wouldn't say that my perspective is a presupposition, though. I think that I feel like I'm making less assumptions and adding less ontologies from the available data I don't think that just looking at nature by itself is enough to go one way or another, but I think assuming intention or God behind it all, I think it's an additional assumption that I think is it's not necessary.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'd have to have some
Okay,
type of
so-
predictive success for intentional states, right? We'd like that's the additional thing that needs to be accounted for. I mean, presumably it's going to be predictive success. Like we should expect if it's designed this thing, but that doesn't seem like what the theist is doing. It's kind of goes back to what I'm saying earlier, is that it's really easy to just motivate an entity with a desire for, like, I guess my worry is that the DNA could have been any way, right? Let's say that there's possible worlds where we have just any way life could have been, carbon-based, silicon-based, or however. Let's say it's contingent. I just don't see why the theist couldn't generate a hypothesis that says, oh, well, what best explains the data is that God wanted, or an entity wanted life such a way. He had the ability to, and didn't have countervailing reasons. But that's not like, I don't see where some predictive success comes from. It seems like you bake in all the motivations that you want right away, and so it's really easy to explain anything.
How would
That's
you,
my biggest issue.
I'm still haven't made the connection between the need for motive. Maybe I'm just not near as schooled as you are on that subject, but the need for motivation and like the viability of theism.
Well,
You
I
can
want
have whatever
I want-
motivation you
Well, I
want.
want predictive success is what I'm hoping for, right? So like if the hypothesis is true, we should expect this thing in the future that we don't know. But that's not the type of moves that theists seem to be making. They seem to be either making like I'm okay if someone's trying to make some like Bayesian kind of analysis and they just want to say it's more probable and like we can go through that whole thing. But in the case of when someone's trying to say, look, I'm making predictions and we're trying to explain the data, like the way that I'm taking evidence to be is that there's some type of expectation that you would, on the hypothesis, and we can do something where like maybe we falsify it doesn't come true, or something else comes true, then we say, well, that theory doesn't work. But I don't ever really see that for the theist. It's like we divorce ourselves from the virtues that I like, and that's fine. I mean, we have to self-impose them on ourselves, but I don't really take the theory very seriously when I don't see what falsifies the theory. It doesn't seem like anything's added to say, here's what would falsify the theory. It doesn't seem like there's any verification or repeatability. And that's fine. You don't have to accept that. And then most importantly, it doesn't seem like there's any novel predictions. And once the theist has kind of said, look, I don't really care about that stuff. It's not important in my view. I'm willing to hear out what is, but it always ends up turning out that those things are they're vices. They're not virtues. They're not things that like actually gain results in the world. We wouldn't have a science of medicine without predictive success, right? We would just be like killing ourselves all the time. And it just, that's not a virtue to the theist. It's hard for me to take the position very seriously.
So, I mean, first, really quick, back to the discussion on presuppositions, which does connect to this. And I do kind of want to touch on predictability for the theistic framework. But when we have the discussion on design, and then you say, well, you see, I look at examples of design in living things, and then I see how that's just an example of how evolution can actually do that. And so you actually don't need design. You are then at that point presupposing the truth of evolution. And you might say, oh, well, I'm doing it based on evidence. But then we just had the discussion. And someone said it earlier, it might have been Mike. Yeah, you might look at that and say, like you guys, as, okay, see, that's evidence that you can have appearance of design without a designer. But that very same person said, but you guys wouldn't look at it that way. You would say, oh, see, it didn't happen that way. And so therefore you actually do need a designer. And what that is we're looking at the same data, but we're coming up with totally different results. And that is the game of presuppositions at that point. But listen,
It's
let
not
me
going
be
to
clear on
be
what we believe.
presupposition, though. It's going to be
We believe
predictive.
that the science is actually against evolution. And we could also have that talk if you'd like to have that
Yeah.
talk.
That's a big talk, right? Yeah, but I mean, I would just cite endogenous retroviruses, and that's going to be like, I mean,
that would be microevolution, though. That's not any evidence for macroevolution.
What are you talking about?
It's families.
No.
Now,
Endogenous
you need change
retroviruses
outside of genus. It has to be like what's the level above genus again? I forget.
No,
the term.
so microevolution is what
family.
happens when microevolution is true. Microevolution is microevolution on a long-term scale. I don't think that we are making presuppositions when we're looking at
Well, wait a minute, though,
evolution.
because we've never observed, other than in a plant, which we had to use artificial for lack of a better, we had to insert different things to make macroevolution happen with plants. But as far as like a typical human or animal species, we've never seen macroevolution take place
Look,
in front of ours. We've
so
never observed that.
No,
how
this is
familiar
like-
are you with endogenous retroviruses?
I'm no expert, but I've
Yeah,
seen.
so the
Never
the
heard
idea is that if we even had 12, right, of
It's like I'm
these,
gonna put something lighter on because I'm burning up.
um,
I'll be right back.
if we even had like 12 lined up, right, I think the probability, right, that's going to be between, say, chimps and humans. If it was just 12 that lined up on endogenous retroviruses that we have, that we share this, then the probability of that being the case is like 1 out of more atoms than there are in the universe, right? But it's not even the case. Like Guido points out that we share 205
Viruses
out of 211, right? That's like statistically, you betting against that for common ancestry would be very strange to me. It'd be
We
very-
haven't observed
it.
it, though.
It would be very. It would be
what
like.
is
Yeah,
an
it-
endogenous retrovirus?
Hold on. What do you mean we don't observe it?
We've never observed a chimpanzee, or the previous what
I
they said was
kind
the
of
previous form,
Blamed it,
Australopithecus.
maybe I was distracted.
I'm sorry.
Hold on, Brendan. You were actually, is Brendan frozen?
Well,
I just
maybe not. But
lost
look,
connection for a
I
minute.
mean, there's a lot of things we do observe. We observe polyploidy speciation, which is just like direct speciation
not clear
from
yet.
one generation to the next. But
Speciation would be a form of microevolution, though. Like that's within. So speciation can be a form of species creating a subspecies, like the finches. That I can hear you, Brendan. I can see you too.
I think you're back if you want to come in.
Okay.
So like Darwin and his finches, right? He observed the finches over time in the different parts of the island have the beaks adjust a little bit to adapt to the weather. That's microevolution that's been observed. As far as Australopithecus turning into what we are today, that we've never observed. That's totally like that's all assumptions based off of the fossil record. That's really the best that we have.
No. Molecular homology as well. You could throw away all the fossils.
But that
and
doesn't
molecular
logically follow because you have similar molecular homology. That means you evolved over time. Does
let me. I'm trying to. Do you agree that like allele frequencies in a population, like there's a frequency of like there's a distribution of alleles in a population over time? Like you agree? Sounds like you agree with microevolution. You agree with distribution of alleles, right? You agree with that, but you're disagreeing with like gradual change over time that has phenotypical changes. That's the thing that you disagree with.
I agree with what I agree that we have observed microevolution. We've tested it in a lab. We've seen it happen with flies. We've seen it happen with finches. We've seen it happen with finches are birds, with all sorts of different bugs, plants. We've never seen macroevolution because we can't. They say we have to be around for
we
millions
literally
of
see
years.
polyploidy.
Yeah,
right?
you can't actually.
Macro evolution, right? It's going to have an emergence of new species, and so in polyploidy speciation, you get what you end up getting is that the offspring can't actually reproduce with the parent species. You get direct, right? You get direct macro. It's
That
This is what
doesn't
it- hold on,
prove
can I
macro.
jump in for a
we
second?
literally observe
Go ahead,
this in
Gustav, I won't jump on you.
we usually I'm sorry, we directly observe this. So I'm kind of confused. And
We don't say that tigers and lions are of a different kind, biblical kind.
What do you mean by kind? Clade or species?
It's above genus.
Yeah, but
What is it, Adam? What did you say?
clade or species, because it might matter.
So
We might not
kind and
disagree.
family are like the same thing. Nobody in the scientific realm, right? Phylogeny and biology, they don't use the word kind, but it's essentially the same as right above genus, which I believe is family.
Okay.
So I want to jump in for a second.
yeah,
I wanna say
so-
something.
Go ahead.
Okay.
So
good.
there's two things.
I'd love to get Guido in here because he's a bio major and he's just like I can tell he's like, oh man. Like,
So I think there's a real issue here on two different levels. One, it's strange to me that you wouldn't believe in evolution because we can't see.
Macroevolution.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That you don't believe in macroevolution because we can't observe that kind of time sequence. But you don't hold that same kind of hyper empirical mindset for the theistic worldview about not being able to observe something in real time. That's the first issue I have. The second issue I have is, from my understanding, microevolution is simply microevolution in an extended period of time. There's no difference there. The microevolution is what happens when microevolution is true. That's at least what every biologist I've ever talked to has said to me. And the last thing I'll say is that, we don't, you how do I phrase this? You never met your great grandfather, right?
Mhm.
But you understand the process of how we come to be, and so you understand that at some point down the line, you had a great grandfather.
Mhm.
So why would it be that in the context of evolution, all of a sudden this is a problem?
So I see what you're saying with time, but there's another factor in determining what's the difference between micro and macro evolution. Microevolution can be totally accomplished just fine through a subtraction in the gene code, but macro requires an addition. And that's something we haven't observed genetically, is like fundamental additions. There's some level of small what do you call it, mutations that are able to have some level of benefit, like the
But you get
sickle cell
phenotypical
anemia.
changes
But
just
other
from
than
point
that,
mutations.
you can't add on to and a good example of that is like with dogs. We can even speed it up and use some intelligence with artificial selection, and to get to from wolf or whatever to like Pomeranian, for example, you remove giant sections of the gene code to do that. You're down selecting, but then if you try to breed back from a Pomeranian, the smallest dog, one of the smallest, back up to wolf, it would never be possible. You actually can't. All of that capability is lost, right? All of that change, that was actually a lot of change. And you might be confused and say, wow, there's so much change in that. Clearly, that's evidence for macroevolution. It just proves that you can actually make a lot of change with only subtractions in the gene code without any addition. And in order to get from amoeba to horse, you have to add a tremendous amount of information. That's just something that that's just not observed, and so that's why we're being skeptical. Now, C said something interesting earlier. I thought that was interesting, was that, okay, we're saying we don't see it, so we don't believe it. Well, hold up. You don't see God, yet you believe God. How does that make any sense? We believe God, and again, it's not based on a gap so much as it actually is a rule. Like from Stein, as an example, just it's fresh in my mind. Everybody blinked for a minute. But when you see evidence of design, that means there must be a designer. So we're actually saying that it actually follows, that demands a designer. We're not saying there's a gap, and that's why we posit one. So it's actually different from evolution here. We're being kind of skeptical in the science, but with the designer to designer, we're actually not being skeptical. You see what I'm saying?
So I want to show you a number of comments because I think, again, well, I don't know if Mike wanted to respond to any of that, but again,
there's a lot to respond. It just, to me, sounds like you have a fundamental misunderstanding of how evolution works, right? I mean, like,
I said a lot.
Yeah, but like, it's just weird because like you didn't mention anything about point mutations and phenotypical changes. You didn't mention the whole addition subtraction thing. Just seemed to be like a bouquet of rhetorical flowers. I don't really see, like, that's not something that biologists are going to agree with you on, right? So like, that's fine if you have a fringe view on it, but that's clearly a fringe view.
Well, good thing science isn't determined by consensus.
True, but again, it is.
I mean, no, it's not. But you have to make predictions for your hypothesis. I get that we have a story.
So we do. I don't have it on my head, but we do have examples of that. Dang it! I should have memorized that one. So we do have examples of predictions made specifically through creationism, but
what predictions?
You just have to say, oh, he said that, but he didn't say what it was.
No, it's fine.
I have yet to see predictions made by creationism that aren't just doing the thing that I charged it with, which would be positing such a desire that can bring the outcome, and desires it doesn't have countervailing reasons not to bring it about. Just doesn't seem like an interesting story.
But if we didn't observe macroevolution happen, aren't you kind of doing the same thing?
If I didn't observe macro, what are you talking about?
So, for example, like you have, in order for
we made novel predictions. We said, look, we have Pangea, And if that this is predictions made in multiple fields of science. We have Pangea. Maybe we'll see some species at some layer between like the western coast of Africa and the eastern coast of South America. And then we go look and we make a prediction. Maybe we'll find it in the geological column or the strata here. We go look, we find it. Really good evidence, right? Amazing evidence.
So I believe
evidence of what?
Of common ancestry, evolution, our geology. It's unified between theories of science. It's as best as you can get. You have unification between theories, right?
What is the evidence, though? Just finding it in the rock, finding it in the layers?
I mean, do you value transitional species, or do you value?
Well, so the first thing that set me on the journey to why I'm going to be skeptical of evolution was when the Supreme Court in the 1980s banned the teaching of creation and said that you can only teach. But is that
there's a reason for that, though? It's because it's.
I mean, if it's so easily disprovable,
if it's so, yeah,
no, it doesn't. Look, it's not. What's do you have a falsification criterion?
What I'm saying is, why wouldn't we teach both?
It's just because it's not science. Why don't we teach Why don't we teach astrology,
brother? Evolution
right?
is called forensic science, not directly observable. The same thing with creationism. All of these are outside the realm of observable science. Do not equate macroevolution with direct biology that we can observe, or with physics, or with chemistry, which we can directly experiment on any day. You can't do that with macroevolution. Nobody has ever seen an amoeba, for example, become a mouse.
That's not how evolution works. When you say amoeba become,
well, it had to happen at some point.
Yeah, but you're just sounding like Kent Hovind right now, right? Like it's hard to take it seriously when someone says amoeba to a mouse. Literally in the debate I watched with him, and
that stuck in my head.
Professor Dave was an amoeba turning into a dog, right? And that's like when someone utters that, it's like it's. So let me put it this way: when you say that, it's like if me and Cesar are talking about Game of Thrones, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I really like Dennis Rodman and that he's really good," and we both look at each other like, "What are you talking about? You've never watched this show." That's what we get when we hear this. We're like, this guy doesn't. No offense, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Why? Because amoebas didn't become horses. Is that why?
An amoeba did not turn directly into a horse. No.
I know that. That's fine. I'm just saying the amoeba is like the simplest life, or one of the simplest lives we have, right? So I'm just saying a real simple thing to something very complex. It might not be in the exact phylogenetic connection that you guys have, but either way, it makes the point. Something extremely simple had to become something incredibly complex.
Yeah,
by itself.
I just
against the second law.
I want to hope you know that if evolution like crumbles, like all of our fields pretty much crumble, right? Like everything's
now that's interesting. Why would that be?
Why? Our knowledge in it's going to affect in any field, right? We're unifying novel predictions based in other fields, in geology or in archaeology or in chemistry, right? These are all related. So there's an explanatory virtue called the virtue of unification, right? So the fact that we can unify phenomena with predictions is really good than just having an isolated prediction in some field. When all the fields come together and make novel predictions that independently verify the claims in the field or the hypotheses, it's really good. It's really good.
I guess I'm still confused here, because it seems to me that when we see these changes on a micro level, these small changes, why would it not lead to far greater changes, almost unrecognizable changes, over a very, very, very long period of time? Because I think that is what evolution is suggesting.
By the way, I'm going to give a 5-minute little warning because I'm an hour and 10 minutes later than I said I would be. So, but anyway, go ahead. Sorry, guys.
Oh man, I'm sorry for keeping you.
Yeah,
turns out I didn't have to do what I had to do, so it's no worries. I didn't get a text message or a call, so I'm good. I just got
we're thankful you could join us, man.
But sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, so go ahead. I apologize.
Oh, go ahead, Brendan. Go ahead.
Okay. Cease, you said that wouldn't all of these changes, these minimal changes that we see over time, add up to something greater? Like the logic seems to kind of follow, like you would expect something like that to happen. Well, we also do see that when we try to force changes in a species or something, like dogs are a good example, eventually you hit a wall where viability in the wild decreases a lot. And an example of this is where you continue to subtract off the gene code, for example, all the way to poodles. Their hair never stops growing, so you have to get it cut. So in the wild, a poodle's hair would eventually grow so much it would just get caught in a thicket, and then it wouldn't be able to survive. That kind of thing. Like you actually reach a wall where now you're not so viable anymore, because you've left the base, and we would say that would be the base kind that is represented in nature. If the gene code varies too much from that, you lose survivability.
No, but nobody's saying this isn't even remotely a problem with evolution, because nobody's saying that evolution can't lead to a dead end. It does so all the time. I would also say, to show this subtraction thing is not a thing in biology. So this is not how.
That's interesting. I'll have to provide some expert comments on that. Like.
Why don't we do this?
Maybe that will help, because you seem to think I'm pulling that out of nowhere.
Let's do this. I would love to have you guys both back on to further this discussion, both on what your evidence for God is, and also maybe specifically how we understand evolution differently. I from my perspective, and look, I'm not even remotely a scientist. My field is philosophy. But from the conversations I've had with people who are in the field, I think that there are some misconceptions about evolution from both of your ends. But maybe I can bring some of the people that I've talked to who are in the field on, who might be able to engage on this level better than I can. If you guys are interested in coming back.
Yeah,
definitely. That would be awesome.
I would recommend we stick to, because we started like on the moral argument, and then we went like all. I mean, there's just so much to talk about.
We went all over the place. Yeah,
there's so much to talk about, and so I think because I would agree that we had a great conversation. It was stimulating in every topic that we went through, even though we had disagreements. At least we were able to have the conversations, and so let's, if we can, do this. Let's like focus on one or two.
That'd be perfect. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I figured we would probably stick on one, but I mean, I'm okay with the fact that we bounced and all that. So, but if we want to streamline that and make it on some, that'd be great. We could kind of we could do what we did here in a sense, but like, hey, what about this in private? And then you should be like, yeah, or I want to talk about this, and then just stick with that one thing.
Not great. That again, this was a great conversation. I'd just be like, if we really want to really dive into evolution or any of the issues,
you're gonna have to spend some time. Yeah.
Yes. To thoroughly go through our arguments, whether we agree to disagree at the end, change your mind, whatever. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Lacona and our airmen had a 7-hour debate on the resurrection. And
I couldn't watch the whole thing.
A lot of people were like, 7 hours? Like, why would you have a 7-hour debate? It's like $50, I think, if anyone wants to go buy it.
That's ridiculous.
But
I might do that.
I want to do it too, so I might actually end up doing it. And he made the same point. It's really points that there's so much to talk about this, that if we want a definitive resurrection debate, it takes about this much time to talk about all this stuff. And so, yeah, some of these things it takes serious. Me and Cease have like a 5. We always joke around. We're like episode 52 on our disagreement on morality, and then we go from there. So we still haven't really solved that. So no, I 100% sympathetic to that. Yeah, I don't know if you guys want to give like any last words before we just kind of sign off, but I always want to make sure the guest just wants to kind of get anything off that they might not have said, or channel plugs or anything like that.
Yeah, follow us on
and I'll put that in the description.
Thank you. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Truth Over Tea, all one word. And then, I mean, you can follow us on TikTok, but similar to you, Cease, I'm on Truth Over Tea 3.0 for a reason. This is my 4th channel. The first 3 have been banned, so.
Oh, wow.
I love TikTok.
really aggravates.
Oh, on TikTok, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I lost 20,000 followers because I made one video on like Islam. So
each time I would get 30,000 followers, it seemed that was like, okay, time to, and they would cut me. So.
I stopped talking to people were like, why are you talking about Christianity, not Islam? I'm like, well, when I did, I lost monetization. And when I did it again, just to be like, maybe it'll be okay this time, I lost 20,000 followers. And so I was like, yeah, wow. I'll just like not do that on TikTok, and I'll do that other places, I guess.
Yeah. So
Wow.
if subscribe to our channel. We kind of went all over the place, so I think that kind of hindered us from narrowing down on specific issues. But I had a lot of fun, and I can't wait to come back. So I appreciate the time.
Yeah, no,
thanks for coming on.
and I appreciate you guys were very cool, very calm, and so we appreciate that. I'm less calm usually in conversations. This is actually very tame for me. I think the viewers would agree. I get kind of I can get angry. I'll put it that way. It's not personal. It's just kind of the way I am. And
Well, I've seen like Cease. I watched I watched this debate with you and a guy whose argument for God.
Oh my God, the 7-week cycle thing.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That guy calls into the atheist experience when I'm on, and everybody just like eats him up.
I was, I couldn't finish it. Like, so I was hoping, like, all right, it doesn't seem like they've been able to have the best and I haven't watched all your videos, but like
Sure.
I can't possibly be that bad.
Right? No, we've had more good conversations than we've had bad conversations. Conversations of that kind have been maybe a handful of times. For the most part, it's been productive, I feel. But that guy was particularly idiotic.
Yeah, I don't remember too many that were bad. The only one that comes to the top of my mind is we had someone who's Muslim on, and they just were like defending like beating women and like crazy stuff. Ooh. So it was like, yeah, it was bad. But
okay,
yeah. Well, go read Nisa 34 if anybody's interested.
I'd also like to.
They'll tell you specifically what item to use too. So.
But
yeah. Anyway, guys. I mean, if
I think he's freezing.
Yeah, I was freezing a little bit, but anyway, we appreciate everybody. I'm gonna.
I think he was trying to say something. Hold on one second.
Oh, was he? I cut out audio. Sorry.
We can close out.
No, Brendan, go ahead. No, go ahead. I didn't. Everything looked frozen, and then it came back. So I'm sorry.
Can you still hear me?
Can you hear?
Yeah,
Brendan's
I'm not
frozen.
getting good reception right now.
I think I keep saying
Brendan, I can hear you.
But I mean Brendan.
Thank you. Thank you. It is Brendan. I get called Brandon every day.
Yeah, I bet that's a thing for you every day.
Yeah. But yeah,
Brendan, if you want to say
anything. Great talking to you guys. Yeah, I just want to say thank you. That was a great discussion. And, I know we disagree on a lot of things, but, a lot of the world and a lot of the West struggles with being able to talk to people they disagree with. And so we really lead the way when you could just talk to someone you disagree with. That shows like maturity. So that's a good thing. But, and I know you may not believe this, but not only does God exist, but he came to the earth and he paid for your sins through his own blood. So I have to say that on YouTube before I can be.
I don't mind people. Yeah, I'm not going to get.
Amen.
Yeah, I'm not going to be mad. If someone starts like reading a bunch of verses to me, I'm just going to end the show. But yeah.
Oh, man, I was ready.
Yeah, it's like if you want to give me a verse, great. But yeah, there's, I've yet to have somebody just kind of go on or something about it. But it'd be like kind of the same thing if I just was like, yeah, and God doesn't exist, and I just keep going on about it, and you're like, dude, just okay, end the show.
Maybe at some point we can also have a theological discussion about Christianity in that context. Why? Because for me, there's two reasons why I'm not religious. One, I don't see the evidence on an intellectual level, but on a moral level, I think there are some real problems with the both Christianity and Islam that I take issue with, and maybe we can have that conversation at some point.
Okay,
sure.
But that's it. Thanks again for coming on.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Guys, thank you so
no
much.
problem.
And, everybody, if you haven't already, please hit the notification button, like on the video, help us, and all that jazz. We don't typically plug all that stuff, but if you want to help support us, you can support us on Patreon or any place like that. And hopefully we'll be getting you more content tomorrow. Lance Bush should be on, so we should have a consecutive show tomorrow. And Lance Bush will talk with Cease probably mainly, but we're going to initially just go over the kind of stance independent, stance dependent, moral fact distinctions, kind of general meta ethical outline. probably maybe the first 15-20 minutes, and then we'll move into a kind of a discussion with Cease and him on the view. I'm sure Cease will probably like lay out his view, and then Lance will provide some types of criticisms towards it. But anyone who doesn't know Lance Bush, type in Lance Bush on YouTube. Go check out a video. There's I can't remember the girl. She runs a Christian channel, but she had an atheist who's a naturalist, who's a realist, Lance who's an anti-realist, and then herself who thinks morality from God. So it was a very interesting conversation between the three of them from three different perspectives. Good conversation between Lance and James Fodor specifically. And so go check that out if you want any prep on what you might be in store for, or go back to our previous conversation with Lance Bush. That is all for us, guys. We appreciate you. We love you. And as always, I fumbled to find the button so that we can end the show. Peace.